Well, good morning. Welcome to Debbie's Back Porch. So glad to have you with us today. Last week I did a video on canning the ball recipe for pot roast in a jar. And last night I decided I needed a really good dinner. So I opened a jar. I have to tell you, the serving suggestions in the book, the all-new Ball Book of Canning and Preserving, leave a lot to be desired. So I thought I'd show you what I think is the best way to prepare this for serving. In 5 minutes, I had a serious home-cooked, from-scratch dinner. I added a tomato from my garden, and this is a meal I would be proud to serve to anyone. I'll show you how I did it. For a pint jar, you're going to need 1 tablespoonful of butter, 1 tablespoonful of flour, and the broth that's in the jar. If you canned in quarts, you're going to double that. 2 tablespoons butter, 2 tablespoons flour, and there'll be enough broth in the jar. So I'm melting the butter in my little cast iron skillet. You can use any pan you want to use. Now there should be a ½ cup of broth in the jar, but that can vary, so I'm going to measure it. You can add a little bit more broth to it. If you're short, I'm going to add a couple tablespoons full. Now the serving suggestions say to add a tablespoonful of flour, but they don't say how. And I can tell you from experience that just adding a tablespoonful of flour to this broth and trying to beat it in is going to result in lumps and a kind of a pasty taste. So in my humble opinion, it's worth the extra 5 minutes it takes, even on a busy night when you're tired, to go ahead and turn this broth into a proper gravy. So I've melted the butter. It's in the process of melting. And I'm going to add the 1 tablespoonful of flour. And I'm going to mix that in. Now I've got my heat on about medium. What I'm going to do here, and it takes maybe 3 minutes, I'm going to brown this. And you have to stir it while you brown it. You don't want to burn it. So we'll stir it and then let it cook a little bit, and then stir it again and let it cook a little bit until it starts to turn brown. Like this. You see the difference there? You see the color? There'll be no pasty taste. When it turns brown, not black but brown, we're going to add the broth. My heat's still on medium, and I'm going to just stir this to make sure it's all mixed in and there's no lumps, and there won't be any lumps, but just in case. And I'm going to let that bubble and simmer a little bit until it starts to thicken. When it gets good and hot, we're going to add the rest of the jar. And it's not really thickened yet. I'm adding the jar of meat and vegetables now so that they will heat up all the way through as the gravy thickens. You'll need to stir it a little bit every once in a while to keep it from sticking. I time-lapsed a little bit. If you'll see, this is starting to thicken up. Depending how thick you want your gravy, just cook it until it's at that point. I want it just thick enough to stay on the meat and vegetables and not just run all over my plate. And I think we're about there. So I'm going to take this beef out, and you can see I've already sliced my tomato. I didn't get a lot of tomatoes this year because I didn't plant a lot, but the ones I got were just wonderful. And this is a Cherokee purple. You can see that deep color. Now this is a pint, which, you know, that's probably a little bit too much beef for me, but not a whole lot too much. If I had done this in quarts and I was serving this to somebody else, I would put the beef and vegetables on the plate and I would serve the gravy on the side. But I'm just going to spoon a little bit of this gravy over my meat and vegetables. And here's a little tip. If you wanted to make a beef pot pie, just cut that beef up a little bit and just with this gravy pour it in a crust. And just bake it until your crust is nice brown. So I'm going to spoon some of this gravy over. And I didn't let it get real thick. But if you let it keep cooking, it will get real thick. This is thick enough to me for a nice brown gravy. And this is the finished product. Now, if you're serving this to your guest or to your family, nobody would even know this was a canned dinner, unless you told them because you were proud of it. And if you'll notice, you didn't see me even add salt or spices because they're all in the jar. If you're a canner, I hope you try this. If you're not a canner, think about becoming one. And join our Facebook group, Safe Canning by the Book, on Debbie's Back Porch. And I'll put a link in the info section. Hope to see you tomorrow on Debbie's Back Porch.